Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. Welcome to our second session today of our Tech Week. 7Cs have decided to do a series of Tech Week live seminars, starting with the mystery of S-100. Hopefully everybody has managed to get themselves set up without too many technical hitches. To introduce myself to everybody, my name is Emma Wise. I am Sales Director for 7Cs and Chartworld Group, and I will be your host for today's session. I will jump in with questions and keep our experts in check. But other than that, I will leave the experts to give you the details on the mystery of S-100. Today, our expert is Friedhelm, and he will be talking to you about the mystery of S-100, what that actually means. I don't know what you think about when you hear S-100. For me, I think about a big headache, a big delay. Will anything ever happen? I also think Google. I also think autonomous shipping. I also think lots and lots of information. All these different items pop into my head and in discussions that I have with our customers. Hopefully, Friedhelm will be able to unravel the mystery of S-100 and what's behind it as we move through the session today. A bit of background on Friedhelm. He is a geodesist and holds a geodesy and hydrography degree. He's been with the company for 18 years and has worked with us in a variety of roles, from S-57 data production, training, customer support, research and development, and product management. Today, he is a director for our product strategies and solutions. Friedhelm has a long experience and specialized knowledge and expertise in the domain of electronic chart production, and has expert knowledge about relevant IHO standards. He regularly represents our company at IHO working group meetings, industry conferences, and exhibitions. A little bit of information about myself. My background is cartography. I'm a marine cartographer, and I worked with the UK Hydrographic Office for 8 years before joining the 7Cs and Chartworld Group about 6 years ago. So you have a number of experts around this table. Pavel is our technical expert, and Holger is another one of our ENC experts here to help you today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping rules. One is that the webinar will be available on the 7Cs YouTube channel, and we will inform you via email once this is available. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we will be taking questions throughout the session. You can type these in the questions in the GoToWebinar, and we will try and address some of them towards the end and some of them throughout. So without further ado, I will hand over to Friedhelm to start unraveling the mystery of S-100. Thank you.
Yes, hello and welcome again. And thank you very much for joining our session on the mystery of S-100. This is our first session. Actually, we've run this session this morning in order to cover as much time zones as possible. Now I see that also the American continent has an opportunity to attend at a reasonable time. So what will we be talking about today? I will start with a short overview. First of all, we will have a look at the question, why do we do this webinar on S-100? What I also try to do is to come up with an analogy in order to explain S-100. It's an analogy from daily life. It's about cooking. So I don't know if everyone likes cooking, but definitely everyone likes eating. So might be a good analogy. We will see. Based on this analogy, I will continue with some of the important S-100 components. We will talk about the benefits of S-100 and have a look at the S-100 standardization process. And finally, we will have a look at the new S-100 based ENC which is based on what's called S-101. We'll have a look differences to the existing S-57 ENC. And yeah, then we will do a short wrap up and we will answer some of the questions we've been collecting.
Before you get started, Friedhelm, I would like to put a poll out to the audience to see what level of knowledge we're dealing with when we're talking about S-100. So you can see the poll on the screen now. The question is, you have probably heard of S-100 before. What is your level of knowledge? Please select one. So looking similar to this morning. A few more experts, it looks like, Friedhelm, than this morning. Okay. Looking like we've got 8% of you have never heard of it. Oh no, 12% of you have never heard of it. 60% have little knowledge, 20% medium, and 8% of experts. So Friedhelm, you might have some challenges. Over to you.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, but I hope the way we set up this little webinar is still suitable for all of the attendances. Yeah, we had a look at the overview first. Yeah, why are we doing this? This webinar. Yeah, we are receiving quite a few questions regarding S-100. There are questions like, will S-100 replace S-57? When will it replace S-57? What are the benefits of S-100? And do you support S-100 already? And for most of, there are more questions. And for most of these questions, the answer is never just yes or no, because it's a bit more complex. And in order to give you a better understanding of S-100, I will just continue with an analogy. But before I do this, actually, the S-100 is one of the IHO special publications, and it's referred to as the IHO Universal Hydrographic Data Model. This is a framework for hydrographic related data. This could be electronic navigational charts, bathymetric data, water level information, surface currents, and many, many more. S-100 exists already. The first edition 1.0.0 was released in 2010, and the edition 4 will be released in December. To answer the question, what exactly is S-100? Yeah, we could look at this special publication to the documents, and we will find it's a 734 pages PDF document. It has a foreword, an introduction, a scope, so at least this part gives us an idea what this is all about. Abbreviations are useful. We get information about the objectives of S-100 and so on. And then the tough parts begin. There are 15 individual parts on topics like definitions to describe geographic information, data portrayal, which is how data is presented, metadata, coordinate reference system, data encryption, and so on and so on. Personally, I really find this very hard. And I always tend to ask the question, do we have to read it all? 734 pages. Well, again, the answer is it depends. And it depends what we want to do. But first, yeah, we want to understand, and this is why I'm now coming back to this analogy. The S-100 analogy. A few years ago, IHO released an S-100 video explaining S-100 and some aspects of it. And for some of the aspects, a cooking analogy was used. So it was explained like, well, you have ingredients you use for cooking, you have a recipe, and then you produce food. What we're trying to do now is to even extend this analogy and see if we can even explain more of the aspects of S-100 and get a clear picture. So I personally think an analogy is a good approach, and I hope it's also a good approach to explain and unveil the mysteries of S-100 today. So we could imagine S-100 as a special recipe book. And when we look at these icons, we see that the recipe book is pretty empty. It needs to be filled with recipes. It doesn't mean that S-100 as such is an empty document. If we stick to this analogy, it would provide lots of information about food and some basics about cooking, but it doesn't have a single recipe. So what we want to do is, for our cookbook, we want to include as many recipes from various authors all over the place as possible. And if we would contact different cooks and authors, and if they would be willing to contribute, we would probably receive all kinds of recipes in very different formats. So if we receive all of them in different formats, they would not really be suitable to directly integrate them into our cookbook. So what we would expect, or what we would require, is that all these recipes come in a kind of consistent and well-defined format. So they all should have the same structure. So then we could include them in our cookbook, and the result would be, a consistent cookbook. So what we have to do is we have to provide our recipe authors with format instructions. The recipes must be structured in a consistent manner. So, for example, we could tell them what language to use, what font style they should use. The recipe or the document representing the recipe should have a particular structure. Maybe it should have a heading, a short description, a list of ingredients, cooking instructions, and maybe an example image, which could be optional or not. And this is pretty much what we also would require in order to specify an S-100 based product. So over time, the number of compliant recipes increases, and we can add them to our cookbook. So there's no particular limit. We want to have as many recipes as we find useful. Having this analogy in mind, we hope that it's easier to understand the individual S-100 components. One of the components you may have heard of is what's called the registry, the S-100 registry and its registers. What is a register? There's a definition. It's a collection of items used to create and, you could say, consume hydrographic products. So a register could be something like a table or a list, which registers all the individual items we need in order to build a particular hydrographic product like an ENC. So for example, a lateral buoy would be an item of this register. A depth area would also be an item of the register. The registers are associated with specific domains. So there's the hydro domain, but there's also a domain for weather, for AIS, inland actors, and so on. If we go back to our analogy, we could probably compare our registers, for example, with a food store. We require a definition. We could say a food store is a place where we buy the ingredients for our the ingredients for cooking. And a store usually has different departments. So there's a department for vegetables, fruits, meat and fish, spices, drinks, and so on and so on. So these different departments in our analogy represent the different domain in our registry. So the registry is the entire information or the information system of individual registers. So individual registers, according to S-100, are the data dictionary register, which in our analogy would be the food store. There's a portrayal register in S-100, which could be another store, maybe a store where we could buy the items we need for eating, like plates, forks, knives, and so on. Also, there is a product specification register. These are the accumulated recipes. So in the product specification register, we would find the product specification or the recipe for ENCs, the recipe for bathymetric data, currents, weather information, and so on. Then there is a register for producer codes, which represent the data producers, like the hydrographic officers. In our analogy, this could be the restaurant or a cook. If we look at the way a product specification is set up, we can also use our analogy. A product specification is a technical description defining the characteristics of a geospatial data product. In our analogy, it would describe the characteristics of the food we are going to prepare. So a product specification, of course, has a title, an abstract. It describes the content and the structure of our product. It provides information about the reference systems that could be used, for example, horizontal reference systems, vertical reference systems. There is a section about metadata, portrayal, and so on and so on. Again, in our analogy, this would be the recipe for a particular meal. In order to specify our product, we also need what is called the feature catalog. The feature catalog could be considered as a subset of the data dictionary register. Remember, the data dictionary register could be our food store. For a particular meal, we don't need all the stuff we can get in the food store. It's just very specific ingredients we would need. So the list of features and attributes specific to the product. Actually, in preparation of this webinar, I was talking to Holger, who's also sitting here, and I said, well, you may want to review my presentation. How do you find this analogy useful? Does it work? Because Holger has been actively working on the S-100 standard. He's a member of the working group. And so I think, Holger, what you said is that analogies are good, but they also have some weaknesses. I don't know, can you explain to our audience where the weakness is at this part of my analogy?
Yes, of course. First of all, hello to the audience. It's Holger speaking. As Friedhelm said, I like the analogy because I like food and I like cooking as well. But from my experience in the several or different standardization committees, I'm not only an expert in data modeling, and I found a better example or better better analogy for this. Because if you are participating in this meetings, then you are also becoming an expert in drinks. And a better example might be not just food, but reduce it to drinks. Then what's in our feature concept dictionary, these are the ingredients which we have to drinks, like orange juice or vodka or gin or I don't know what else. And in the feature catalog, which is not only a subset of the data dictionary because it binds things together, it combines things. Then we would have in the feature catalog already cocktails. And the feature catalog itself would be the menu of the cocktail bar. Probably that explains it a little bit better. Also, I think as any analogy, this has some weakness. One of them is it makes me really thirsty to speak about.
Okay, Holger, thank you very much. So yeah, please forgive me that I didn't choose the analogy with the drinks. I can see that Holger, yeah, would love to have a cocktail right now. But first of all, we have to finish our webinar here. Let's continue. Another part that's always linked with the product specification is the Portrayal catalog. So for a specific product, again, like an ENC or a product which describes currents or bathymetry, we also need instructions how to visualize the content. So in this respect, the Portrayal catalog is also a subset of the Portrayal register. The Portrayal register would have all kinds of symbol instructions independent from the product, but the Portrayal catalog exactly defines the Portrayal rules for our product we're just looking at. Our symbol instructions or the Portrayal catalog contains symbol instructions, the symbols, symbol files, line styles, colors, and so on. In my analogy, again, sometimes analogies have weaknesses, but I say, okay, the Portrayal catalog is something which helps us to consume our data, to consume our dish. So in order to eat our meal, we need forks, knives, or plates, and maybe glasses, depending on the dish. And that would be my analogy here for the Portrayal catalog. What's also very important is not only to know what ingredients we need, we also need to know how to put them together. And we need some cooking instructions. And this would be the equivalent of the so-called encoding guide. And the encoding guide contains data capture instructions. So a cartographer, for example, would use the encoding guide to use all the ingredients and put them together according to the cooking instructions, and then to produce a nice meal, which could be a nice ENC maybe. Yes, at the beginning, when I introduced why we do, or when I talked about why we do this webinar, I was referring to many questions we get, which are related to S-100. One of these questions is always, yeah, what are the benefits of S-100? S-57 has been around for quite some time. What are the benefits of S-100? First of all, before we talk about the benefits of S-100, I would to focus on the limitations of S-57. S-57 was clearly designed with focus on ENCs for use in ACTIS. There's no clear separation between S-57 and ENC product specification, and many people just either confuse both terms or both specifications, or they just consider it to be the equivalent. S-57 is difficult to maintain. The reason is that during the last years, certain supplements have been published because the working group members recognized, okay, something is missing, something cannot be properly represented. And such supplements or such changes, they affect all stakeholders, not only the data producers, also the equipment manufacturers, and at the end of the chain, the ACTIS user. So at the end, an ACTIS user may have to update, or ACTIS users may have to update their ACTIS systems. S-57 does not support special requirements for gridded data or time varying information. So when we look at this S-100 world, it's much brighter. What we can see, it provides all kinds of maritime services and products, which, yeah, this graphic tries to illustrate. Actually, I took this graphic from a presentation that was given at the HSSC meeting describing the progress of the S-100 working groups. So what are the benefits? First of all, the large variety of maritime products and services. When we look at the NAS 57 ENC, it kind of lives in isolation. With S-100, we can combine the ENC with other data products. We have a flexible version control, which is based on the registry. We have a plug-and-play concept, which means if an application is S-100 compatible, it can read a product in the future that today doesn't even exist, because both the application today and the product in the future, they will follow the same rules. S-100 components also follow the concepts of GIS standards, which allows a much better interoperability with GIS products and tools. Let's have a look at the standardization process. Who's been responsible for these 734 pages, which can be quite some pain? One of them is actually sitting here, because Holger is a member of the S-100 working group. The S-100 working group is an IHO working group that is responsible for the maintenance and the development of the standard. The working group works by correspondence, and it has annual meetings. Today I learned ideally twice per year. They consist of 110 members from IHO member states, but also expert contributors, for example, from industry, and also observers from international organizations. It's a bit difficult to have 110 people working on one topic or on one document. So this is why the S-100 working group is divided into sub-working groups and project teams that work on specific topics. The work of the S-100 working group is subject to HSSC approval. HSSC stands for Hydrographic Services and Standards Committee. It's the IHO technical steering group, and it promotes and coordinates the development of standards. The membership is open to all IHO member states. So this means that the S-100 working group does not take decisions regarding the publication. There's always the HSSC involved. We'll have a look at the standardization process, or the path to the publication of a standard right now. The first edition of S-100 was released in 2010, and edition 3 was released in 2017. Starting from this edition, we can have a look at the path to publication. There were requests from IHO member states or other stakeholders with respect to edition 3 of the S-100 standard, and they were asking for extensions. So the S-100 working group would do the work, would prepare a proposal, and then would provide it for evaluation by the member states and relevant stakeholders. These proposals were accepted by the member states for inclusion into a draft of edition 4. And the next step is that this goes to the HSSC, and then HSSC endorsed the changes to edition 3 and approved the draft edition 4 of S-100. Then the IHO Secretariat circulates the draft edition to the IHO member states for their approval. And that's actually where we are now. The member states have been asked to reply by December 14th this year. So we still hope that the release of edition 4 end of 2018. And Olga, since you have been involved, and is that realistic that the standard still will be released this year?
I actually don't know the outcome of the poll and from the member states. Of the member states say yes, then I say yes, it will be published this year as a Christmas gift.
Okay, I guess we should be a bit more confident. So let's assume that they all agree, right?
One question I have, Friedhelm. When you say that the release of edition 4.0 will be at the end of 2018, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that edition 4.0 of S-100 means that the end customer, will have S-100 data and products available to them?
Yes, actually, that's a good question. And in one of my next slides, I will present an overview how individual S-100 based products are related to various editions of S-100. I think it's already one of the next slides, and that should actually help to answer the question. So what's the status of the product specifications? If we look at this overview, you can see in 2010, edition 1 of S-100 was released. At that time, there were no products. So the first product that was released in 2012 was S-102, which is the bathymetric surface or the bathymetric grid. Then the S-100 standard still required extensions due to requests or due to the fact that stakeholders recognize, okay, for this specific product, S-100 doesn't give enough guidance. So before we can define a specific product, we need to extend S-100 accordingly. So edition 2 was released in 2015. Edition 3 was released in 2017, which then was good enough for products that under the number S-122 and S-123, which are marine protected areas and radio services. So now we're shooting for edition 4 to be released end of 2018, which then will be used by new editions or the first edition of S-101, the ENC, and edition 2 of S-102, and also S-111, the surface currents. In 2019, probably more product specifications will be released that then are linked to edition 4. So what we can see here, that an individual product specification is always linked to a particular edition of S-100. Having said that, when S-101 is released end of this year, which will be the first edition, it's still not operational. And I don't know, Holger, can you explain this a little bit more? I mean, this means we can release S-101 at the end of the year, but it's not operational.
Yeah, I can try. It means that the product specification already has a feature catalog, but the encoding guide will not be complete, and other parts of the product specification are still missing, especially also validation rules will not be there. So why we have this edition then? And it's because then it goes to a wider audience of testing. We have testing, or testing would be done inside the S-100 working group. There were test beds. But now, after edition of the publication, the test environment is just larger, and then more people can test this. And then there will be in 2 years another edition, which has more. There is a full encoding guide, and also the portrayal will be complete. And that is still not operational, because we still need then, before it goes operational, testing against validation software and so forth. And then in 2022, as far as I'm can remember, this is the plan to have the first operational edition, which will edition 3 of S-101. And that means from that point on, this data can be used in navigation systems.
So Holger, just to confirm, so you were saying around 2022, 2023, the S-100 product should start to become a reality for the end user?
If you mean with end user, the active users, yeah, then the answer would be yes. Of course, there will be other users which use this data before, but mostly for testing or getting the things into operation, because this is nothing what you can switch on like the electric light.
Just one more quick question on this topic, and for an application developer, if they are developing Anectis or some kind of navigation system that is going to portray S-100 data, when does this become a reality for the application developer?
I think with the edition 2, everything should be in place for an application developer. So because between this stage and edition 3 is mostly the validation which is not correct. So or what's not there, which has to be developed. So the edition 2 will be bring the Actis developer or the application developers in the position to create their application. They can even start before, but the last bits and pieces, to speak, will come with the edition 2.
Yes, and hopefully by that time also the Actis performance standards will be in place to support S100 or S101. Okay, you see, it's the question, when will it be available? Why do we have the first edition now? It's not so easy to answer. And but what we can also see from this graphic is that there is a certain progress. When we look at 2010, actually we had an S100 standard, but we didn't have any products at all. And now the situation, we can see that there's a progress with respect to this. One of the most important products that's based on S100, and that's probably the product where most people are looking at, is S100, S101, the S101 ENC. And what I would like to do, just to give a few overview regarding the changes or differences between the S57 ENC and the S100 ENC. So first of all, probably important for the data producer, there's a new terminology. So in S57, we would talk about objects. In S101, we call it a feature. What is an edge in S57 is a curve in S100 or S101. Nodes are points. These are just some examples. There are probably a few more, but these are the most significant. S101, which is actually a good sign, adopts most of all the existing S57 objects. Little change as the encoding. So we don't have the 6-character acronyms anymore. So a depth area, which has an integer code of 42, will be turned into a depth area with a camel case code depth area, similar with a lateral buoy, and so on. What's different from S57 is that S101 uses complex attributes and something which is called multiplicity, which is also referring to the attributes. I will have a slide explaining this. Also, what's new is special information types. There's something like update information and cartographic features that have been introduced. These are things that are not known for S57 ENCs. Talking about attributes or complex attributes and multiplicity, as one simple example here, we have a cardinal buoy. In S57, we would have one attribute to encode the colors, and we would encode it like yellow, comma, black, comma, yellow, all the values in one attribute. Multiplicity means that we can use the attribute color multiple times, and each individual instance just has one value only. The top mark is a complex attribute. in the S57 ENC, top mark and cardinal buoy are two separate objects. Now the top mark is a complex attribute which has an additional hierarchy with respect to sub-attributes. So the top mark has a top mark shape, and again, the top mark also has a color. So this structure is new, that's not known from S57. If we look at another example with a sector light, we have 3 sectors here in S57. We would have to encode 3 different lights. Here we have one single light which has 3 complex attributes which are called sector characteristic, and each of the attribute sector characteristic has sub-attributes, so-called complex attributes, in order to encode the sector light properly. I think I just need to explain information types. These are objects without geometry. They carry information about features or spatials, and they are associated with such items. A good example would be contact details, service hours, and so on. And then we have update features and cartographic features. Update features help us to provide more detailed information on ENC updates. Today, when the ACTIS installs an update, if you want to review it, what we can do is we can highlight the feature, but we don't have detailed information about what actually has been changed. This is what update features will be used for. And cartographic features will contribute to improve the clarity of the display, to avoid clutter, because they help us to control the text placement. This is something we cannot do today with S57. So I guess we have reached the end of the presentation. And as far as I can see, we have some questions coming in. And so I would like to hand over to Emma and maybe present one of the interesting questions, while I will scan a little bit more questions. And I'm not sure if we can go through all the questions, but at least we would like to present the most interesting ones. But we will, as a follow-up of this webinar, we will publish all the questions anonymously and then also provide an answer.
Thank you, Friedhelm. There are a few questions that have come through. One of the ones that I'm going to bring up first is related to can S57 data be converted to S100 or vice versa? To answer that, the IHO already provides a free tool to convert S57 ENCs to S101 ENCs. But the result of this at the moment is just a copy of the original S57 file in S101 format. So, in other words, it does not contain any of the new features of S101 that S101 introduces. For an example, we can add the same note to multiple individual objects, for example, opening hours, addresses, and contact persons. To encode this kind of information, a simple conversion does not work. We would need a native S101 editor. This also means that we may lose information when S101 data is converted back to S57. With FME and R7C's S101 plugin, it will be possible to go both ways, but as explained before, there may be limitations. So hopefully that answers the question on S57 to S100 and vice versa. Holger.
Okay, I will pick up the next question. The question is, if S100 contains a Portrayal register, why is the publication of a new product specification, e.g. S111, depend on the publication of a new edition of S100? In this case, or let's say this way, if you want to make a product and the existing edition of S100 has not the appropriate parts in it, then you have the standard has to be extended. If it's just a new product with using existing encoding and existing encapsulation and just the Portrayal or the feature catalog changes, then there's no need for waiting for a new edition. With S-111, I think it was that they using this gridded data and the current surfaces, and they need the NetCDF encapsulation, which was not in the part before, or it was not appropriate, was there. So that therefore they needed the wait for the edition to have a proper encoding section or encapsulation section for this, what was required by that data product. I think that was the reason why these dependencies happened. This was not about the portrayal at all. I hope that answers the question.
I just picked up another question. Some of the attendees asked, did you mean by ENC also inland ENC, or will that be another product? Yes, when I said ENC, I mean ENC. Inland ENC will be a separate product with its own product specification. And another question referring to IHO tests, data sets and IHO test standards. That's what's currently used for ACTIS type approval, that the test data sets that IHO has released for S57 need to behave in a proper way when they're loaded in ACTIS. The question is, the way I understand the question, will there be test data sets for S100 or S101 data as well? I will just hand it over to Holger, who I believe is a real expert to answer this question.
Yeah, I think this was something I have forgotten when I talked about the different version of S101. It is not only that the validation rules will be implemented in a later stage, but especially this test data set is one of the last things which will be created for the edition 3 of S101. So there will be test data for sure. And this is coming with the latest version before it's becoming operational.
So one question regarding this issue, this means that these test data will be part of the product specification, or will there be an extra standard for the test data, or is it not known?
I have to confess that it is not known to me. And if this is part of the product specification or if it's a resource which can be used for that product, I don't know exactly. But that's probably not that important. The more important thing is that there will be test data.
Okay, thank you, Holger. Emma, I don't know, you have some more questions coming in?
A couple of questions from this side of the table. You mentioned about IENCs being a different product to the ENC. Is it the same as for port ENCs, bathymetric ENCs as well? Do they each have their own S10 or S1XX number associated with them and a different specification?
Yes, the answer is yes. With respect to bathymetric ENCs, the Inland ACTIS community introduced a bathymetric ENC containing bathymetry in S57 for the latest edition for the Inland ACTIS standard. And the intention is to also migrate to an S100 based product for bathymetric inland ENCs. And if there are initiatives to also introduce a bathymetric ENC for the hydro world, but not for the inland actives world, the procedure would be the same. Basically, the S-100 standard just gives a description how to specify, how to set up a product specification, and according to these rules, a product specification for a bathymetric ENC or a port ENC could be set up. I don't know, Holger, you want to add something?
Yeah, just an observation I just made when I, in the last days, looked to this data dictionary, and I looked up some of the attributes, and I found actually values in this list now, which comes from the inland community, for instance, for vertical datum. So there was in the old time with S57 the uncomfortable situation that S57 was frozen. Nothing could be changed, even not on the feature catalog or object catalog, if it was using the right term. And therefore, the inland community has to duplicate some of the attributes, which was not only for the implementers and users really a nightmare. And now this can be merged together. And this has already been done. All the values, for instance, for vertical datum, they are now stored in the registry and can be used for any product that is based on that registry.
Okay, one more question on this side relating to when you were talking about complex attributes and multiplicity. So there are two parts to this question. The first part is how much work is it for hydrographic offices to switch from S57 ENCs to S101 ENCs? And the second part is when you talked about the different coding on light sectors and cardinal buoys, is this an automatic or manual process, and how will it affect being used on board ships? Who's going to take that one? Friedhelm?
Yeah, I will start, and as always, if I get lost, I will hand over to Holger. But I guess I can answer this question. Yes, as I said, that there's a large amount or percentage of features that will be adopted from S57, and for most of them, if we think in terms of a straightforward conversion, it's a simple mapping of the old object to the new feature. For objects with complex attributes, we would have to convert the 3 sector lights into a single sector light with 3 complex attributes. This can also be managed by a conversion tool, and as mentioned before, we use usually FME to do such kind of conversions because they give us the flexibility to design the conversion rules. Things that are new or that have been added, like items like the information types or the update information, this is very new. In order to add this to the S100 dataset, I need this information from a different source. So this information is not contained in the S57 equivalent of my S101 dataset. So I need to retrieve this information from a different source, and I can see that Holger has some important things to add here.
I don't know if it's important. I just want to give an example of what those things which has to be manually added. There was a limitation in S57 that each attribute can only be once on a feature object, could not be repeated on a feature object. And there was a problem with the so-called national names or national information attributes, which are there in S57 to encode names or information in a national language. Now, some countries, they have more than one national language, and they had a problem to code this information in all the language, which by some laws in these countries should be in the data because they cannot just use one. Of course, with the multiplicity larger than 1 and also with the complex attributes, because now I think this information is not only stored as a text, but also together with the language identifier. So that the system even can identify which language is this, and if you can filter then from the system those things. So, but the text and the languages, of course, cannot be automatically created. Might be you can use Google Translate for that, but I would say the result would not be sufficient.
So what you're saying is we will have a Google edition of S-100 at some point in the future. Okay, don't know if that's good news or not. I'm just looking around if we want to present some more questions. I mean, there are quite a few questions coming in. Time is running out. We cannot read them out all, but maybe we have time for one more question, Emma. As I said before, we will publish all the questions and also provide a comprehensive answer and then send these questions and answers to all participants. But Emma, there's another one for you, or one you picked up.
Okay, last question. I'll challenge you to answer it in one short sentence. When can we expect HOs to start producing data in native S101 format? Any takers for that one? Holger?
That's actually a question which should go to the HOs. So there's nobody here on this table which representing an HO. I have seen from the list of attendees, there are several HOs in the list of attendees. But I can bring forward these questions when I met them the next time on the next meeting, and actually ask them and then share the information with the community. But I don't know what the HO is actually planning. And what I can imagine is that some will be faster than others. That's I learned from the experience in the past.
Okay, thank you, Holger, and thank you for all the questions. And a final thank you for listening to us today. We hope it has given you some further insight into the mystery of S100. If you're super interested and more technical minded, perhaps you want to join our session tomorrow also, where Holger will delve into the technicalities of S100 and what really makes it tick. So thank you again. As I mentioned before, we'll follow up with email with the remaining questions and answers, and also share with you the questions and answers from this morning's session. So without further ado, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you will dial in again tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.